All right, so we'll go on to this Q&A. Again, we'll go into this Q&A. Question came up that whatever comes up, I guess, comes up frequently, and that is, how do we deal with people we don't like? Whether family members, whether people we work with or we have to work with, or people that, I don't know, you have to deal with. People see in a government office, in the store, on the street, etc. So there's a question also. Someone will say that someone, let's say, speaks Lashon Hara. They speak badly against someone else, or they'll ask the question, why do they have to hear it? In other words, person, whatever, uses bad language or curses or whatever. You fill in the blank, whatever the negative thing is. So we'll hit the second part. First. The question, why do I have to hear this? Why did this happen? So there's a famous story with Rabbi Eger, blessed memory, more than about 150 years ago, more, or 200 years ago. And he traveled to go to a wedding, to go to a family wedding. And while he was there, someone there, whatever, was speaking to him, actually a family member. And when they were speaking, this person said, whatever, he said certain things that, let's just say, I don't know, he was joking, he was kidding, it was essentially what we call late sunnus. Late sunnus means someone who scoffs, someone who mocks. And Rabbi Kiva was like shocked. Rabbi Kiva Eger was shocked. He's like, first thing he did, after hearing this, ran out of the hall, went into a side room somewhere, no one could find him, and immediately took a cheshbon nefesh, a self-accounting. Now, why did he take a self-accounting? So he said on himself, it must be, I did something wrong in order that I had to hear this. Right? In other words, taking upon himself that he must have sinned at some level, whatever it may be, that, in other words, it was his fault. Now, what do I understand from this? Things don't happen for no reason. Now, it could be, a person, works in a certain environment. People are, let's just say, for lack of a better term, some people may be uncouth, right? We'll use that term, right? They're uncouth, meaning they talk, they say what they want, they don't care what other people think. Not necessarily a bad thing, but they run their mouth, so to speak. And they say all kinds of things, right? Mostly things that are forbidden. So again, a person would ask, what do I do when I'm in that situation? Say if the Lashon Hara good, try and change the conversation. Right? Chofetz Chaim says in the laws of Lashon Hara, if you're able to walk away, very good. What if you're stuck there? Nowhere to escape. So whatever the person says, you can't believe it 100%. If it's something that you may have to guard yourself against, that you're allowed to do. To guard yourself, you're allowed to. To believe it 100%, you're not allowed to. Now, according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, so why did the person have to hear that? So according to him, he would say the reason is because I sinned. I did something wrong. This is one of the ramifications. Now, others would say, why did a person have to hear it? What was the whole purpose? And that is a test. Imagine, and a lot of times people will say, I've been in this process, whatever, process of conversion, in the process of, being a no-hide, whatever it is, I don't feel spiritual growth. Right? I don't feel like I'm stagnating, let's say better. It's like I'm stagnating. This question comes up a lot also. Or, I'm burnt out, or whatever the case is. So it's very easy to do a test. Now, what would be the test? What would be a very simple test? A very simple test would be, let's say a person works on 1 hour a day. Not talking 2 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, 1 hour a day. A person says, no matter what happens, I'm not going to speak Lashon Hara. Or they're not going to curse. Let's say 1 hour a day, whatever that hour is. That's, Murphy's Law, that, it's going to be like the hardest hour of the day, but okay. You choose an hour or half an hour, whatever it may be. Now, over time, if a person's been working on themselves, right, even 1 hour a day, a person will see progress. Why? Because then they'll hear someone, let's say they'll hear someone speak Lashon Hara. And they'll say, oh, I can't believe this person spoke Lashon Hara. I can't believe, that this person cursed. So you're going to say, a person could say, listen, I'm not really holding anywhere in the world, that much. Okay, I work an hour a day. I'm trying not to do this, but that's something, right? And a person will see progress. What does it mean they will see progress? When they hear someone speak badly or curse, what are they going to do? They're going to scrunch up their nose. They're going to look at it and say, oh, I can't believe the person said it. Again, that doesn't mean, you're truly righteous, but what does it mean? It means you have a higher awareness. When a person has a higher awareness, and again, we're a very weak generation, doesn't really matter, but if a person has a high awareness of something like this, or even, they want to try and control what they see, whatever it may be, they have the ability to do it. But I'm not saying it's going to be easy, right? But most people, the most important question they've ever asked in their life, do I put mustard, ketchup, or relish on my hot dog? That's where some people are holding. So this is already something. Somebody wants to change. Somebody wants to be better. Someone does not want to get caught up in this, so to speak, right? So something like that, person can work on. Even if it's, it's not that much time. Okay, I'm not telling you 6 hours. You take on something easy, right? Something that's doable. This is doable. But you'll see change. I'm not going to say, overnight, but you have a higher awareness. When a person has a higher awareness, look at the rest of the world. People say what they want. They don't care. They insult someone. They don't, whatever it is, they don't care. They're just going to say what we'll call shil shul shel peh. What shil shul shel peh? Diarrhea of the mouth. They just talk. If you get offended, they'll say more. It's another problem, right? Say, do you mind, kind of sensitive to people that curse. So you know what they're going to say? They'll curse more, right? I don't know if you have an obligation to say anything, but that's one thing. So answer the second part. Now, the first part, I think, is a little bit harder. First part is we all come in contact with people that annoy us. A person comes to synagogue, some people, may annoy you. You're in the store, some people may annoy you. So Victor Miller, very interesting. Someone asked him, he was one of the Torah giants of the last generation. Someone asked him exactly this question. So he said, I'll give you a piece of advice how to love people. He said, let's say someone comes to synagogue and he's there every day. He doesn't really pray so much, but he's there. He speaks to people, interrupts people. We call this person a nudnik. Yeah. He's up, pacing. I'm not saying necessarily person's got ADHD or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Right? But whatever, the person, it's kind of disturbing in a certain way. Rav Victor Miller asks, on a person like that, how can I love him? There's no obligation to love a Jew, right? A Jew has to love his fellow Jew. You cannot hate your fellow Jew in your heart. You can hate what they do, right? Again, someone, is a murder or whatever. Okay, it's a different issue. But I'm saying in general. So somebody like that, paces the aisle and speaks and in the middle of prayer and he bothers people, this, that. So Victor Miller asked the question. So he says, how can you love such a person? This person is a nuisance. It's annoying. Yeah. Kind of like it's kind of like a fly. What do you want to do when you see a fly? Swat it. That's what you want to do. Smack it. Right? Because it's annoying. And, in Israel, even flies have an attitude. Like, they're just like, sometimes they just don't give up. They're just like so persistent. It doesn't have to be Israel. It could be anywhere. But like, if there's an attitude, it'll be an attitude here plus. So in any case, says Rav Victor Miller, how am I going to love this person? This person's annoying. Yeah. Very good. So he gives advice like this. He says, for 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, even less, for 2 minutes, for a minute, think something positive about the person. Because go on, this person's annoying, this person's this. You're right. But you have to get, the animosity out of your heart. Again, I'm not saying where he did something necessarily egregious. It's a different issue. Right? But the person's annoying. So he says, for a minute, think something positive. So what's the advice? So he says, there are a lot of Jews, unfortunately, don't go to synagogue at all. Right? Maybe not even Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. You never see them in synagogue. Okay. So what happens? This guy shows up. This guy's there 3 times a day. Maybe annoying. Certainly maybe annoying. That's true. But he's there. Right? He's there. So I can look at this person and say, okay, he is 100%, 100% annoying, right? That is true, right? That 100% is true, but says Rabbi Victor Miller at the same time, he's there. It's consistent, right? There is something to be said for consistency. So, so his advice is, I try and find something positive. Or I give them the benefit of the doubt. Meaning, maybe they're having a hard day. Maybe, they have a child that's sick. Maybe their spouse is sick. Maybe themselves are sick. I don't know. Any number of things. But we're very quick, to accuse. We're very, we're very quick to say, oh, look what this person did. Look at this, and that's true. Maybe they did something. Okay. When this comes into the question of emunah, so maybe God sent you this person to work on your anger. Well, the Chovos HaLevavos says someone bothers you. He says in the gate of Bitachon, right? In Shar Bitachon, in faith and belief in God. He says someone came, bothered you, right? God sent him to bother you, to test you. So what are you going to do? Be like the person who hits a dog with a stick and go after the stick, right? God's using that person like a stick. So you're going to say, that person's annoying. That person caused me damage. Very good. Yeah. But isn't God the one who sent it? Isn't he the one in charge? He's the one in charge. I have free will, right? Free will may be limited. Big topic. Free will may be limited. Doesn't matter. That's going to be a test. And how I'm going to deal with it. I know someone, I laugh, I shouldn't laugh, but I know someone has a very public job. A very public job. He doesn't like people, right? He does not enjoy being around people. Because people annoy him, which I can understand, right? It's a very public job. Okay. So I asked him once. I said, I don't understand. I said, you hate people. People annoy you all the time. I mean, I could be one of them. I don't know. Right? People annoy him all the time. I said, so what are you doing in this type of job? You should be like, in a back office somewhere, no one can bother you. You can just like, deal with, do whatever you have to do. You don't have to deal with people so much. So I never got a clear answer. Like, whatever, it's been doing the job for a long time. I just find it kind of ironic that, if you're going to be out there and, if you have to sell a product or, the customer service or whatever it is, and you have to deal with people on a regular basis. If you're not a people person, it's going to be kind of hard, right? It's going to be, it's going to be pretty hard, to do the job, or even be successful. You hate what you do, but you have to deal with people. It's what it is. So, so I would say in general, when we're out there, people go through all kinds of things. We have no idea when we're dealing with this person what they've been through 5 minutes before, an hour before, 2 weeks before. And let's say we did. Let's say we did. So we can't judge anybody unless we've been in their same shoes. Unless we've been in the same situation, the exact same situation, then we can say this, that, or the other thing. Right? But if you haven't been in that situation, you can't. You don't have a right to say it. Yeah. So, that's what I would say in that. So someone here mentions, take this question now. Someone says, I read somewhere, someone is knowing a person, someone who dislikes deep reflection on what we dislike in ourselves. Also true. Also true. In other words, everything's measured for measure, right? A lot of times that if a person, critiques someone else or critiques something, there's something inside of them, that it has a special place. That's true, right? That is true. That I won't disagree with. Right? And not always the case, but I would say, yeah, it's probably more the case than not that they have a special affinity to it or they've done it before, right? So they're calling attention to it because it's affected them. Yeah, a lot of times. A lot of times that, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but it's probably a lot. Right? It definitely is probably a lot. That I would agree. Someone asked, what's the dumbest reason I've heard, not to believe in God? Dumbest reason? I'll tell you the most common reason. Probably people don't want to believe in God. Probably the most common reason is they don't want to be subservient to anyone except themselves. They don't want to be told what to do. Right? I would say it's probably one of the main reasons. I'd have to think about this one. What's the dumbest reason? I don't know. I got to think about that one. I've had people say, well, I believe in God may not be the same way you believe in God. Right? So the question is, do they really believe in God? Right? Which was when I was going to middle school in New York, I was interviewed by, a local paper, and basically I said, a lot of people say they believe in God, and I think it's a bunch of garbage, which I still do. Because even if they say but they believe in God, what does that mean? So I think technically it means they believe there's a supernatural power that's beyond us. Okay. Did he create the world? Is he in charge of the world? I don't think people have thought, very deep, very deep about it. But there are, many people will say, they definitely believe in God. I mean, I've heard people say that, belief in God is hard because, a loved one died or suffered, right? So like their belief in God goes out the window. So, that I've heard. I think that the stupidest thing I've heard, or one of the stupidest things is, and I've heard it a number of times. So, you know what they say, if you hear a lie long enough, it sounds like the truth. People are going to believe it's the truth. But I had someone say, and they were already probably in their 60s already, and obviously, I was a religious Jew. And they were saying that, when I grew up and I went to the Jewish school, and the Rebbe hit me. If that's what Judaism is, I don't have anything to do with it. Now, this person, pretty much secular Jew. But this happened over 60 years ago, or 55 years ago, whatever it was. A long time before. Right? But this person's not alone. People, I've heard of David Kaplan, he should be well. He's whatever, he teaches a number of places, been at Or Sameach in Jerusalem for years, for many, many years. And he once said the same thing, same exact thing. He said, how can it be in this case? Let's say we'll use this guy as an example. Let's say he's 7 years old. He's 7 years old. And, he gets hit in school by the Rebbe, let's say. How do you make a decision that's going to affect your entire life at the age of 7? Now, people say that. There will be people who say that, well, when I was younger, this happened. Or that happened. Again, I'm not talking about something egregious. Getting hit is bad. And I'm not saying not. Right? Or getting bullied or other things. Okay. Why wouldn't you say maybe he had a bad day? Maybe, I don't know, his kid was sick. Maybe he was sick. I don't know, whatever. But how do you make a decision, as Rabbi Kaplan said, how in the world do you make a decision at the age of 7? Yeah. How do you make such a decision? So that I've heard many times. Or heard Rabbi Wine, you should be one of the foremost Jewish historians. Once said, imagine, kids in 4th grade. That's a bad teacher. Right? Let's say we agree he's a bad teacher, or she's a bad teacher. Okay. What's that kid going to say? Not going to go get a job? We don't need no education, right? Pink Floyd, back in the day. What are you going to say? I'm going to go get a job at the age of 10? That's it. I'm done with education. I'm out. No, you say, you had a bad teacher. You may have to go through therapy, other things. Okay. But why would you throw something away so precious at the age of 7 or the age of 8? That's kind of, it's kind of stupid. I will tell you, there is something stupider that I heard. So, somebody once told me, it was a college student. Yeah. So it was 18, 19, whatever it was, or 20. And he makes the following statement. Right? He says, you could prove to me that Judaism is true 99%. But I still have 1% free will. That's idiocy. If I know 99% of the time I play roulette, red 13 or black 13 is coming up, I'm a billionaire. Billionaire. Even if it be 40%, 50% of the time, I'm still doing good. 99%? Or tell me 99% you still have 1% free will? Nobody in their right mind would say such a thing. Nobody. Well, but what was the point? Even if you could prove it, 99%, I still have free choice. That's true. But if you have enough evidence and you evaluated the evidence, now the question is, you're going to follow through. So I was a history major, most people know. So, I had to write papers, right? 10-page papers, 20-page papers, whatever it was. So I said, how do you write a term paper? So he said, take a thesis and spend the whole rest of the paper proving it, and you write a conclusion. I said, beautiful. What if you bring contradictions in your proofs? And then in the end, you leave your conclusion in doubt. He said, oh, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, it's because you fail. I said, oh, you fail. I said, why? I said, why are you going to fail? He said, because you didn't prove the point. You didn't prove the evidence. You showed contradictory things in evidence. Very good. But he said the whole goal is to prove it. But I said, okay, so that's your answer. If you have evidence, and you have ample evidence, mentioned this many times, at least the first two books of the Torah, have been proven by empirical evidence. Yeah, a lot of evidence to prove both books. That's 40%. That's 40% of the Torah. Now, someone could say, even though you've proven it, and even though we know it's true, because it's been proven, that doesn't mean I have to keep Torah mitzvahs. That doesn't mean I have to believe in God. Well, let's analyze that statement. Let's analyze that statement. What that statement tells me is that what's the second book of the Bible all about? Coming out of Egypt. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God. How do you know? Because he took me out of Egypt. Says Chinuch. Right? He goes through every mitzvah and every parsha. He says that's the mitzvah, believing in God. Yeah? Because he intervenes in history. What history? He took us out of Egypt. Right? That's the main theme right now. Everyone busy cleaning away, the houses smell like ammonia and everything else. Very good. Going through the Haggadah, following what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to feel and all that. Beautiful. That's the mitzvah to believe in God. The commentaries ask, why does it say God created the world? That's better. That's bigger than taking him out of Egypt. True. But it was there. Nobody. Except God. God was there. Bereshit bara Elokim hashamayim ve'es haaretz. God created the heaven and the earth. Who was there before God? Nobody. He was. He was there by himself. Building, destroying worlds, whatever he's doing. Before he created this world. Okay. So that's what he's doing. But 3 million witnesses or 2 million witnesses said that God took them out of Egypt. So God intervenes in history. So you say, wow, that's only 40% of the Torah. Well, that's one major tenet, isn't it? That God took us out of Egypt. Not to mention he created the world. But he took us out of Egypt. He intervenes in history. Right? There is a theory. It's a bad theory. Very few people quote it, but there's still such a theory. So I heard about it. And that is why the exodus from Egypt happened. You want to know why it happened? Take God right out of the picture. Because Saturn was out of orbit. That's probably the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So what if Saturn was out of orbit? Right? What does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me a number of times God did the miracles in order to show his power in the world. To the Jews and to the Egyptians. For both. One, to show the Egyptians who the real God was and how he punished them. And the second is the Jewish people, so they believe in him more. And they have faith in him more. Right? That he's in charge. But how can you say I have all this evidence? Forget 40%, 99%. I got 99% evidence and proof. And you want to tell me you still have free will? Now, technically he's right. He still has free will. Free will is not taken away from him. Right? That's the question. Pharaoh's free will is taken away because God hardened his heart. So the Rambam mothers ask the question, so why did he get punished? Impossible to get punished. God says it doesn't matter. He still had some level of free will. Wasn't totally impossible, but God made it to a point where he's not going to change. Right? It's similar to the question I asked many, many years ago. Someone, a Jew, a secular Jew, goes to synagogue, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Worst time of the year to come to synagogue. Yeah, all about doom and gloom. You're in synagogue, a long part of the day. A lot of the tunes are like, gloomy, so to speak. Some of them are, I would say are not so gloomy, but okay. But the theme of the day is death, judgment. That's the theme of the day. So I asked the question many, many years ago. Somebody goes to synagogue like that. Yeah, they go because that's what their heart tells them to do. A lot of people don't go to synagogue at all, not even that. But okay. Yeah, so in the older generation, they would show up on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. That's the only time you see them. And there's probably a lot of people today. It's the only time you see them. But okay. So what does God give them? Now, I'll get hammered for this, but people say you don't know what's in a person's heart. Maybe they're there to pray and change. Maybe. Maybe. Another stupid thing someone once said is, I mean, it's not necessarily belief in God per se, but they said, when you go to synagogue, some synagogues, have tickets. So you have to, buy a ticket at a time. Wherever you get your seat or whatever it is. Now, someone told me the more money you pay, the closer you get to the AC. You make this up, the closer you get to the air conditioner. Okay. So I said, why don't you just buy a portable one and bow down to it? They're like, oh, you're very cynical. I said, you just told me. The more you pay, the closer you get to the AC. Are you there to pray? Or are you there for air conditioning? Now, there are times that, Rosh Hashanah can come in early September, so it'll still be warm. Okay. No matter where you sit, where the AC is going to be. So what is the person there doing? What are they doing? So you tell me, at least they're there, maybe they're praying. Maybe. But somebody like that, so my question was, what does God give them? He knows what's deep in a person's heart. Person can say, you don't know what's in their heart. Okay, I'm telling you what I see. This is what I see. So Berkowitz Shlita should be well, head of Aish Torah in Jerusalem. Big rabbinic scholar. And I heard, one of his classes, one of his tapes back in the day. And he asked the question. I said, beautiful. Beautiful. I had the same question. I said, well, what's he going to answer? And his answer was, God gives them more of what they're doing. More fun, more money, more whatever they're doing. He just gives them more of it. Now, this sort of bothered me a little bit because if that's true, let's say that's true. Let's say that's true. Now, if God throws on top of your evil inclination, he gives you more pleasure, more fun, more ways to do terrible things, who knows what. He gives you more of it. How in the world are you going to repent? It's going to be much harder to repent, if not impossible. Now, nothing's impossible. Yeshua Hashem Kerafayim. Salvation of God comes with the blink of an eyelash. Anything can change overnight. You have to want to change. Give one example. The Gemara Vodazar says there was such a person called Rebbe Lezer ben Dordaya, called him Rabbi. Yeah, what's the story of Rebbe Lezer ben Dordaya? Rebbe Lezer ben Dordaya was a despicable person, wasn't a prostitute he was never with. There was one prostitute he wanted to be with, that he had to travel, 4 or 5 seas, cost him a lot of money, whatever. He finally gets there. He's about to do the action, something happens, and he's asking everyone for help. The sun, the moon, the stars, whatever, the valleys, the peaks, whatever. And they basically tell them it's all dependent on you. Everything depends on you. So what did he do? He said a heartfelt prayer, put his head between his knees, and he died. And the Gemara on that says, Rabbi Lezer ben Dordaya is welcome in the next world. 2 questions. First of all, this guy was scum of the earth. Oh, sorry. So before I get to the question, says Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, who organized the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi said some people get their olam haba, their portion of the world to come, takes them their whole lives. Other people, they're getting one shot. So I have 2 questions. One question is, first of all, why are you calling him rabbi? All of a sudden you get rabbinic ordination? This scum of the earth person gets rabbinic ordination? And how is it that he had a portion of the world to come? Oh, you tell me, beginning Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers, it says every Jew has a portion of the world to come. And someone tell me this. Yeah, and so their claim was, I may not be as religious as you, but see, I'm also going to have a portion of the world to come. I said, great. Did you, they're learning this now. Daf Yomi, they learn 2 pages of Talmud a day and finish the entire Talmud. Learning that chapter now. It's all homiletic teachings there. But the beginning of the chapter, it says exactly that. Very good. It says all Jews have a portion of the world to come. Only problem is, Gemara goes through a number of cases of people who lost their portion of the world to come. Yeah, generation of the floods. You got the, people made the Tower of Babel. You got, others, whatever, the whole list. So I said, well, that's true to a point, but you can also learn, the Gemara on that says people have lost their portion of the world to come. So their claim was, well, I may not keep very much, so my portion will be smaller. My question was, well, who says you're going to get there? Right? There are different things you can do to lose your portion of the world to come. Okay, that's not the topic. So my 2 questions stand. The second question is easy to answer. And that, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi gave an answer. Rabbi Judah the Prince said, why do you get a portion of the world to come? Because they repented so well, and that one shot, that for that he deserved a portion of the world to come. And that, he said, some people get their portion of the world to come in one shot. For other people, it takes longer. So that may answer the second question. But the first question you want to tell me, okay, tell me, Eliezer ben Dordai is welcome in the world to come. Just like when Rabbi Kiva died, is being killed, right? After he said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. He died. What does the Gemara say? Rabbi Kiva is welcome in the next world. Okay. That I hear. He earned it. He earned it. He learned for 40 years. He taught for 40 years. He earned it. That's why he got killed such a way. Good question. But he earned it. This guy, tell me Eliezer ben Dordai. That I can hear. A little bit. I can hear he's got a portion of the world to come. So you can tell me, okay, he got it in one shot because he truly repented in 1 second. Okay. Call him Rabbi? Seriously? I call him a lot of things. I don't call him that. Well, what's one possible answer? He elevated himself so much, and he understood it's only on me. Everything's dependent on me. See, we're in trouble if we rely on ourselves. We don't have schusavos. We don't have the merit of our forefathers. We're dead. We don't have our own merits. Right? That's why when we pray Shemona Esrei, silent meditation, whatever you want to call it, we say, okay, Abraham, and okay, Yitzchak, and okay, Yaakov. We say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are our credentials. We don't have our own credentials. We are, we're invoking the credentials of our forefathers. During the sin of the golden calf, God, wants to destroy the Jewish people. Start again from Moshe Rabbeinu. Everything Moshe says to forgive the Jewish people, God rejects. Except for one thing. Moses says, how can you reject them? How can you destroy them? They are the sons of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Those are their forefathers. And that God acquiesces. That God acquiesces. And he says, okay, I won't destroy them. In their merits. So you see, again, technically speaking, did he learn everything he needed to know for the rabbinic ordination? No. Right? But the fact that he changed so much in 1 second, understanding that everything's dependent on him, right? Everything's dependent on him, elevated him such a point. Mind-boggling. That's what a person can do in 1 shot. Overnight. It's going to take time, but okay. For some people, they can do it overnight. Salvation can come overnight. Blink of an eyelash. Seen it many times, whether it's health, livelihood, any number of things can change overnight. Got to remember that. Can change overnight. And where do you think it's going to come from? Think again. Yeah, probably comes somewhere else. So it's pretty amazing. Someone can be so bad, and I've gotten this question also. Well, I said this, I did that, I did the other thing. God's never going to accept me. Not true. You got to figure out, why you do it, what triggers it, 3-step process, and then figure out how to fix it. Okay. God wants to see a person going in the right direction. The person's trying. God understands we make mistakes. We make serious mistakes. But my Rabbi would say, if you live in the past, you have no future. You got to forget about it. You say you had a bad day, had 2 bad days, 3 bad days. Yeah. Sometimes, a person, God forbid, has cancer. What do? In many cases, you burn it. That's what you do. Sometimes you got to go to a certain extreme, find somewhere in the middle, and be consistent. That's not so easy. Not so easy. Somebody asks, okay, how come we don't stone for adultery? Is the Tenach the word of God? Great question. There are a lot of things we don't do according to the Torah. We can't. The Torah says you're right. There's corporal punishment. There's death penalty. I'll get there one day. I don't know when. The book of Leviticus chapter 18. What is the death penalty for being homosexual? I just gave it away. It's death penalty, right? Same death penalty as desecration of Shabbos, right? Torah doesn't tell me though. Torah says you will surely die, right? It comes by Shabbos, you'll die. You surely die. Yeah, so what punishment is that? So you can't say according to the Torah because the Torah doesn't say. Torah just tells you the person's going to die. It doesn't say how. Right? It doesn't say how. There's certain things that says, yeah, well, you see, but it's not true. You see by someone who cursed, they got that penalty by stoning. Okay. There are certain things that does make clear. That's true. Right? That is true. But death penalty was dependent on the temple being in Jerusalem. The temple being in Jerusalem, you also had the Sanhedrin, right? You had 70 rabbis you had a bigger Sanhedrin, smaller Sanhedrin, right? That judged different things. You had a Beis Din. You had a Beis Din of 3, rabbinical court of 3, judge laws, damages, marriage, divorce, other things. You had a rabbinical court of 23, where they would judge, death penalty cases. Let's say in a Beis Din of 70. They had judge the king, you had judge a Shevet, a tribe, right, or something like that. So Sanhedrin was the Jewish Supreme Court. Now, technically speaking, Gemara Mako says, at the end of the first chapter, that if a rabbinical court killed someone in 7 years or 70 years, they were considered a bloody court. They don't want to kill anyone. Yeah, they want to find all kinds of reasons why to say that. Maybe he did it like this. Maybe he did it like that. Maybe they never saw. Yeah, adultery is a good case, right? Adultery would be a very good case. Because in order to convict someone of adultery, you have to see the action, right? We'll keep this very clean. Keep it PG-13 or less. You have to see the exact action. You have to witness it. And not just, you see them, whatever. You have to see it actually happen. Right? Now, let's say you had a case like that. They saw exactly that. The Gemara says it's got to be clear. You got to be absolutely clear as day that you saw it. Now, what about if you saw it through a, what do you call it? You had this telescope, whatever, that, you saw into a person's room, you saw exactly that. Would that count? So that's a good question. Is that really seeing it? You're not seeing it with the naked eye, right? You're seeing it through a glass. Not the same thing, right? throw this out there. If a person, let's say, went to a synagogue on Shabbos, they use a microphone. Right? A lot of conservative synagogues, reform synagogues use the microphones. Even some Orthodox synagogues, back in the day probably used, microphones. What's the problem with the microphone? What's the problem with the microphone? You're not hearing the person's voice, you're hearing it through the microphone. Or, let's say, it's happened during COVID. There was a question: what happens? You can't get the synagogue to hear the Book of Esther. Let's say. So they say, okay, I'll watch it on Zoom. Very good, right? It's one problem. Watch it on Zoom, hear it on a telephone, right? It's the same thing. You're not hearing the actual voice. You're hearing it through sound waves, through fiber optics or whatever. But you're not hearing direct. You gotta say, but I hear it direct right now. Very good. So my voice being, echoed, through a computer, through all these, sound waves, whatever it is, that's what a person's hearing. But you're not hearing direct. So if it's something, you got to fulfill your obligation. Let's say like hearing the Book of Esther or something like that, or even a prayer service, and you have 10 men and, you're on Zoom and this and that. That doesn't help. Why doesn't it help? You got to be there. You got to hear it in person. You're not hearing the voice. You're hearing, fiber optics. You're not hearing the voice itself. Now, I use that, as an example because in this case, it's the same thing. You actually have to see the action. So now, someone will say, what if the person's in the room? What if they're in the room? So the Gemara makes clear what you have to see. Okay. So what's the point? There can be a lot of doubts. There can be a tremendous amount of doubts. Right? Let's say, I'll give an example. Gemara asks the question. You have two buildings, two people looking out the window, their windows. They see in the square one person, Reuven, kills Shimon. Now, in order to kill somebody, you need two witnesses. Right? You need two witnesses. The Torah says very clear. Shnei Eidim Yakum Davar. Book of Deuteronomy. Two witnesses establish something. Basically, you need three. Right? For another reason. But in order to establish something, I need two witnesses. Now, there's a question here. You're going to say, I have two witnesses. Two witnesses saw the same thing. Okay. But the question is, they're in two different places. Do they have to be on the ground to see it? Can you use both people's witnesses as witnesses if they're in two different buildings, one across from the other? Not my question. Gemara asked the question. Is that the same thing? Right? Some say you can't, some say you can't, some say it's the same thing, it's not the same thing, right? Whatever it is. Whatever it is. So in this case, right? In this case, and this is a question that comes up a lot. It's a good question. It's a question that comes up a lot that people will say, especially Karaites, because they don't want to listen to, what the rabbis say oral law. And they'll say, I'm only going to keep what God says. Now, don't we want to keep what God says? Everybody wants to keep what God says. Right? Why should they want to keep what God says? The only problem is the Torah is very vague. The Torah only tells me, do this, don't do that, but does not give me any legal definition. In the laws of Shabbos, for example, the Torah says you can't carry, the Torah says you can't cook, and you can't make a fire. Okay. Now, the Torah says, if you do any of these things, you get spiritually cut off, and you lose your portion of the world to come. Right? You get death penalty, and you lose your portion of the world to come. Now, we know there are 39 categories, so those are only three. So you tell me, well, all the other things are extra added by the rabbis. Good. But God, in general, cannot kill someone or punish someone if they're not given the details. The Torah does not give details. Right? The book of Numbers, you have someone that picked up sticks, Salofchat. Right? His daughters claimed they wanted inheritance because their father died. Why did he pick up sticks? Did that on Shabbos. They're only going to keep Shabbos when they're in, when they're in the land. But he wanted to show how severe Shabbos was. He got death penalty. Right? He was killed. Torah doesn't say that it was forbidden. Torah doesn't say anything about it. Torah tells me that he picked up sticks. This is what happened. He died. They took him out. They judged him. They stoned him. Very good. That was another thing. That was the fourth thing. But it would be impossible, if not unfair, if God's going to punish in such a severe way, and he doesn't explain or doesn't give us a way to understand why, right? In what case it is. Now, by Noahide, it's a little bit different, right? Now, not everything a Noahide does not do is liable for death penalty. Some things yes, some things no. Well, what's the difference? Because the Noahide is obligated to keep universal laws. Laws that are universal to the Torah. So even if someone, I don't know, Timbuktu, they die, right? They, someone, I don't know, in the bush of Africa somewhere, deep down, they die. God says, hey, did you keep my Torah? Did you keep mitzvahs? What are the two things a person's going to be asked after they die? One is, did they study Torah? And were they honest in business? So you're going to ask this bushman somewhere, whatever, Peru, Africa, whatever. Yeah? God's going to ask him, did you keep Torah? He goes, what's Torah? Never heard of it. So never heard of it. He says, well, you're not Jewish, so it's a good thing. You're not obligated to keep a lot of things, but you're obligated to be a Noahide. Guy's going to say, what's a Noahide? Never heard such a thing. I was in the bush. How was I supposed to know? Okay, good. Yeah. Scott says, I'm going to explain to you what the Noahide laws are. He's going to go through, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 is just an umbrella, right? The 7 are just an umbrella, but they're universal laws. Can God punish someone for a universal law if they didn't know about it? Yes. Can he punish them severely? Yes. What's the difference? These are universal. These are things everybody should know. An example, don't steal. That's pretty clear. Yeah. So there's a Jew has to steal something significant, non-Jew not, but even for the death penalty. But what's the difference? Why is non-Jew punished more severely? Because otherwise it destroys society. But these are things that are universal. So that everybody knows. Right? So God's going to say, oh, I see you kill people here. No, that's, that was self-defense. Oh, God says self-defense. Okay. Right? If it's self-defense, one thing. He had no choice. You had to kill them. Okay. And what if it wasn't self-defense? What if he just got up and killed someone? No, you don't understand. They deserve to die. Why they deserve? God's going to say, why they deserve to die? Because they disrespected someone in our tribe. Okay. God's going to say, they disrespected someone. That's bad. True. That's bad. That gives you the right to kill someone. No, you don't understand. We have tribal warfare. God says, no. Murder is forbidden. Doesn't matter the reason in general. It's forbidden. So that person's in trouble. In my language, he's toast. Why is he going to be toast? Something you should know. All right, but people say, come on, euthanasia, take grandpa out of our own misery, out of his own misery, and he's suffering and all that. That's murder. What's the difference doing that and throwing him off a cliff? Or shooting him in the head. No difference. So even the person and way backwards, who knows wherever they lived, however they grew up. So forget about Torah mitzvahs. So they'll be exempt. They don't have to convert. That's fine. But they have to keep basic laws. They have to have basic, respect for mankind. They have to be moral. Right? They have to be moral. How do they not know that? So the question is, you're right. So according to the Torah, so according to the Torah, we should go back to that. We should go back to that law. But there are other factors involved. One factor is you need a temple in Jerusalem. Right? I'll give another example. Higher levels of purity and impurity that the Torah speaks about. We don't have that today. Heard a number of people ask the question. Why not go back to that? Be great. We should go back to it. What's the problem? we're in a state of impurity. We have no temple in Jerusalem. So the only thing by purity and purity that applies today would be if someone's married, a woman gets her period, she has to go to the mikveh. That takes that level of impurity down. But what about the level of impurity that we're on? Let's say a Jew goes on the Temple Mount, which is forbidden, right? I've spoken about this before. Forbidden for a Jew to go on the Temple Mount. We're not sure where a person's going to step and where the Holy of Holies is, or whatever. You have to be in a certain level of holiness, to do that. Certain level of purity, let's say better. Right? So there are rabbinical authorities that say that's okay. We don't, again, the majority opinion is not that way. But in general, we don't have the level of purity. So any non-Jew comes to Israel, you want to go on the Temple Mount, not a problem, because that impurity won't affect you. A Jew, it'll affect. So why don't we go back to that? Let's go on the Temple Mount and pray and this and that. So you get two problems, right? The main problem is the mikveh doesn't purify you. The mikveh today will not purify you for that. So you can't do that. There's a more practical reason. And that is the Arabs will never let you go up there. The police won't let you go up there. But when it comes to the laws of purity and impurity, it doesn't help. Right? It only helps by a woman who goes to the mikveh. So it's a good question why that works and why these other things don't work. But as you can see, based on what the Torah says, I need guidelines. I don't have any guidelines. You'll say, okay, bring back the red heifer. Okay, very good. There are some that may have been found, right? Everyone says, oh, the Messiah is coming because we have a red heifer, right? To get a cow that's totally red, never worked, not a, black hair, brown hair, right? 100% red. So what do? What would you do? Right? It's a certain level of impurity. You take the cow, you burn it, you take the ashes, sprinkle on the person that's impure. Very good. Yeah. But again, what am I lacking? What am I lacking here? I'm lacking, I don't have a temple in Jerusalem. I'm lacking, I don't have these vessels. Even if there's a temple institute making them and this and that. Doesn't matter. I don't have them. Right? I can't use them. They're trying to prepare everyone until when the Messiah comes. Very good. But practically speaking, we can't use them. Yeah. So the Karaites will say, very good. Yeah, we're going to keep what the Torah says. But they're also frauds, but I'll tell you why, because they also wear tefillin. How do they know what tefillin are? The Torah says put frontlets between your eyes. Wrap them on your arm, put them up between your eyes. Want to tell me what a frontlet is? And when it says totafot, it's not even a Hebrew word, Rashi says. Coptic word, it's an African word, two words put together. It's not even a Hebrew word. Yeah, so how would they know if they didn't have rabbinic interpretation? They would never know. But they wear tefillin. There are thousands and thousands of laws passed down from God to Moses, passed down to us. Very good. But how in the world would Karaites, if they don't believe in oral law, they don't believe in what the rabbis say, so how can they keep it? How can they do it? Right? So the answer is, right? So the answer is you need rabbinic interpretation. If you don't have rabbinic interpretation, you won't know how to do anything. Right? There's a mitzvah. The book of Deuteronomy says you have to listen to the rabbis. Right? Now, someone asks, okay, what if your only choice is the hearing an echo? So in the case of hearing the book of Esther, right? Let's say I had to hear the book of Esther, right? So you're hearing it from someone else through an echo. So the only way to fulfill your obligation is you have to read along with the person, right? You have to read along with the person. But what about, other things? Other things don't help. If that's your only choice, it's your only choice. But you don't fulfill your obligation. Hearing the show, for a good example, right? Hearing Havdalah, right? The end of Shabbos. You hear someone make Havdalah over the phone, right? Question, it's been asked many times. Can I hear it over the phone? Can't get out, whatever. If someone can't come over, can I hear it over the phone? It's the same question. Same exact question. And what's the answer? No. What if that's your only choice? So again, you don't fulfill your obligation. In a prayer service, I saw, there were obviously Reform and conservative synagogues that were doing this, had like a few people there and everyone else was on Zoom. So even if you want to say you had 10 men there, they're not 10 men. It doesn't help you. They're not there. Now we had a question. Everyone, by me, we had a whatever, like a parking lot and a few buildings surrounding the parking lot, like a back parking lot, let's say. So you had people that joined in a minyan on the porch. All these people had porches, or some maybe went outside a little bit, whatever it may be. Can you join that way? That's the whole question. Because you're not actually together. You got one person here, one person there, one person there, one person looking out. Can you join them? So the answer is yes. But they're in the same place. So if a person didn't have a choice, you don't have a choice. Right? If you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice. But, it has to be that you hear the voice, not a, not an echo. Right? And that makes, sense. But, I would say that, you're going to listen to your own voice. Okay. You listen to your own voice. It's not going to, if a person knows what they're doing, good. So they'll fulfill that obligation. Right? If not, yeah. So during COVID, there were a lot of these questions. There are a lot of these, there are a lot of these questions that, that's, it was a whole thing because, you're joining up and you're not together. So listen, if someone didn't need to fulfill their obligation, fine. When kids weren't in school, right? So the Rabbi, prayed with them, whatever, but did it through that. Okay. But no one's, first of all, they're underage, so it didn't matter. And second of all, no one's fulfilling their obligation that way. I mean, a mitzvah to pray, very good. But then, obviously certain things they can't say because you don't have a minyan. So what do you do if you can't do it? You can't do it. It's like, by the way, it's like any mitzvah you didn't do. Let's say someone never got married. Someone never got married or had kids. They say, what happens? They didn't have kids. It's a mitzvah they didn't do. I know someone that was married. His wife couldn't have kids. He said, should I get divorced? So, it comes out that Abraham's married to Sarah for 10 years. She doesn't have kids. She can't have kids. So technically, he could have got divorced. But, he said, isn't it a big mitzvah to have kids? I said, yes. I said, but if you weren't going to get divorced anyway, I want to get divorced just to have kids. I don't think it's a big mitzvah in doing that, even though it's a big mitzvah to have kids. Okay. Yeah. Someone you love and you care for and this and that, why would you do that? Right? If there are no other problems. If there are other problems, okay. Right? But why would someone do that? The thing, this is a very important mitzvah. Okay. I still wouldn't tell anyone to do it. Same thing by conversion. One spouse doesn't want to convert. Right? Let's say. Then unless there are other problems, which I had in a few cases, where some people getting divorced anyway. Okay. That I hear, but I wouldn't tell anyone to do it. I know someone, again, I don't know the story, but the person said, was very happy they're Jewish, they lost their spouse. They paid a price. They for sure paid a price. They're still happy they're Jewish, though. But, it came at a price. So, sometimes there are things that you can't do, that it's just not feasible. So if it's not feasible, a person lives in Timbuktu, they want, you got to move in order to convert. But in the meantime, what do? You do as much as you can do. You're not Jewish, it's easier. Certain things you can do online. You won't fulfill your obligation, but it doesn't matter, you're not Jewish anyway. If a person isn't Jewish. And if a person's Jewish, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. It's funny in a certain way, by COVID, that, people couldn't have, family over, let's say, for holidays or whatever, say by Passover. So it's like, it's like, someone had married kids and it's just, it's just him and his spouse or her and his spouse. So like, that's it. There's no one else coming. Right. So it's like, back to when, you were first married, like, unless you went out, you went to other people or whatever it is. Right. So, it was hard. People can travel, people can go, whatever. It's a crazy, the crazy time. It's a joke that, on that that year, Passover, everyone's shopping or whatever with masks, right? Someone puts up a post and say, wait, why are all these people wearing a mask? Oh, it's just another Passover stringency, wearing the mask. But it's almost been 5 years. It's kind of crazy. Crazy time. Remember one story, people, we didn't have eggs. Well, there was like a shipment of eggs that was supposed to come from Spain and something happened, they didn't come in. So like anytime anyone heard there were eggs, everyone ran, right? Because you make a lot of Passover recipes with eggs. And whatever, it's just a crazy thing. So you're waiting in line. So the guy there, and he grew up in the former Soviet Union, and he said, he said, I'm used to it, waiting in line to get in because we only have so many people in the store. Right. He said, I'm used to it. He said, the only difference is, he said, well, I used to live in the former Soviet Union. There's no guarantee you would get. Like, you're lying waiting, let's say you got I don't know, you got a coupon, whatever, let's say for bread or for, whatever it is, bread, flour, other things, whatever it may be. He said, you sit there in the freezing cold and you're waiting. You finally, get your turn. There might not be anything left. He said, at least here, you're going to get something. But the funny thing was, I mean, it was just crazy. Because a lot of people make a lot of things with eggs. So, and a friend of mine, that the last day of Passover, they couldn't get to the store, or the store ran out, whatever it was. They had one egg. They had one egg. They said, "What should I make with one egg?" They said, "Well, I can make this. I can make that. I can make the other thing. What should I make with one egg?" I mean, it was just a crazy time. Absolute crazy time. We take a lot of things for granted now. But and that time also, if you bought eggs, if you're in a place that bought eggs, they were, you can only buy, a couple. You can only buy a couple trays. That's it. Because otherwise, the people need eggs also. So people send their kids. I'm like, well, it's crazy. It's a crazy, it's a crazy time. Well, at least thank God they had potatoes and had that. Like, you're not going to starve. You're not going to starve. There's also a problem with chickens or whatever for different things also, but still, it was a crazy time. Yeah. Any other questions? Someone asked, is adoption as good of a mitzvah as having children? The Gemara says, if you raise a child as your own, even though it's not your biological child, it's like your child. We see that by Naomi in the book of Ruth, right? It says Naomi's going to have children. Come on. Her husband died. She's old, right? Or, much older. She'll never have kids. But when Ruth marries Boaz and she gets pregnant and has a child, it says Naomi had a child. She didn't have a child, right? Shall raise the child. So when someone raises a child or helps raise a child, they look at it as their own. Now, could they say, let's say they die. Let's say the parent dies. The quote unquote, the one that raised them died. Can they say Kaddish for them? Can they say the mourner's prayer for them? Well, really, it's not their father. It's not their mother. But they look at them as like the father and the mother, they could. So I'll give another example. There's in the laws of damages about writing a document, right? Let's say a loan document. Person writes a loan document. Yeah. So in the loan document, it's an obligation to put the date in case someone's going to try and collect, before or whatever. So you have to put in the date. You have to put in the date. Now, what if in the loan document it says, Ruvain borrowed, $100, and he borrowed it from, and he says, instead of saying the name, he says my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, right? Is that okay? Is that the same thing? Or my father or my mother? Is that the same? Is that good enough instead of using the name? So they're the ones that gave birth to them. Yeah. So that's not a problem. So then there's a question, okay, so what about someone to raise them? Person's an orphan, they raise them. If they put their name in it, is that good enough? Yes. Because it's like they raised them, right? So since they raised them, it's like it's their own child. So it's considered like your own child. Now, technically speaking, is that the same as having your own child? It's not the same. You don't fulfill the obligation of being fruitful and multiply because you didn't have kids. Right? God's not going to look and say, oh, okay, I'm going to check off this box because you had kids. You didn't have kids. But he raised them. And what about people, their great rabbis never had kids? They never had kids. So they said, they said on themselves, all the students were considered like their kids. But they didn't have kids. So really, technically, no. The answer is no. Even if they raised them in their house or whatever, they're still not considered their kids. Right? Biologically. Right? As a specific mitzvah to have children, it's got to be biological. The fact that you raised them, it's considered like you had kids, but it doesn't mean you fulfill the obligation of having kids. That's what I would say. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel time, back to normal schedule. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Mark Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, or Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com, whichever good, beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.